It was a rainy, unusually cold night in late November of 2021, and I'd stopped by at my local Walmart in rural Pennsylvania just before closing. I hadn't planned on shopping so late, but I needed to grab some things for an upcoming trip and figured I'd beat the crowds. The parking lot was nearly empty, bathed in the cold glow of overhead lights reflecting off slick pavement. Inside, the store felt eerily quiet. Aisles vacant except for a few tired employees restocking shelves or chatting quietly near the checkout counters. As I pushed my squeaky cart along, grabbing a few groceries and toiletries, an uneasy sensation crept slowly up my spine. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting strange shadows that danced across the polished tile floors. Something about being in such a large, usually bustling store so late at night felt wrong, unnatural even. Shaking off the feeling, I continued shopping, determined to finish quickly. Eventually, I reached the back section of the store, searching for batteries and other travel essentials. This area was deserted. No employees, no other customers, just rows of silent shelves stretching endlessly ahead. Glancing upward, I noticed I'd somehow wandered into aisle 13. It was strange. I'd been to this Walmart countless times, yet couldn't recall ever noticing aisle 13 before. A strange discomfort settled over me, but I quickly dismissed it as superstition. As I stood scanning shelves for AA batteries, I heard a soft rustling behind me, barely audible over the distant hum of refrigeration units. Assuming another customer or employee had wandered nearby, I glanced over my shoulder casually. No one was there. Unease prickled my skin, but I turned back, grabbing batteries quickly and tossing them into the cart. Seconds later, another noise, this time clearer, sharper, like something metallic scraping lightly along the shelving units farther down the aisle. My pulse quickened. I called out hesitantly, half expecting an employee or someone else to respond. Silence. Gathering courage, I slowly walked toward the sound's origin, peering cautiously down the aisle. Nothing. Just shelves filled with products, shadows shifting quietly beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Turning away nervously, I decided I'd had enough late-night shopping and headed rapidly toward checkout. As I reached the end of the aisle, the sound returned louder, closer this time, a sharp, metallic clang directly behind me. Heart racing wildly, I spun around, gripping my cart tightly. Again, nothing visible, but something wasn't right. Everything about aisle 13 felt off now, lights flickering more intensely, the air colder than anywhere else in the store. Panic tightened my chest, compelling me to flee quickly toward the front. But as I hurried away, another noise stopped me cold. A quiet, unmistakable whisper echoing from within the empty shelves. Frozen in fear, I strained to listen. Words floated toward me, softly, barely audible, but filled with urgency and desperation. "Don't leave me here." My stomach churned violently. Could someone be trapped? Perhaps a child hiding or injured? Despite my fear, instinct compelled me to search carefully, calling out softly for whoever was whispering. Silence answered again. Frustration and dread gripped me tightly. Then suddenly movement flickered in my peripheral vision. Jerking my head around quickly, I glimpsed a shadow darting swiftly between aisles. Adrenaline surged, overriding caution, and I rushed after the figure, determined to find answers, but each turn led nowhere. The shadow constantly evading me, leading deeper into sections of the store I'd never seen before. Finally, exhausted and trembling, I stopped abruptly. Aisle 13 stretched ahead once more. Impossibly, I'd somehow looped back exactly where I'd started. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I realized, sickeningly, that something had deliberately led me back here. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs, breath coming short and rapid. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. My shopping cart sat abandoned halfway down the aisle, exactly where I'd left it minutes ago, batteries still resting untouched inside. Approaching hesitantly, I saw something small resting atop the batteries. A child's faded bracelet, worn and tarnished with age. It hadn't been there moments earlier. Reaching cautiously, I picked it up, examining it closely. A name was etched faintly into its surface, Emily. Without warning, a chill shot violently down my spine, realization dawning coldly. I'd seen that name before on local news reports years earlier, a young girl who'd vanished without a trace from this very store, never found despite extensive searches. Suddenly all lights around me flickered wildly before plunging the entire aisle into absolute darkness. Terrified, I stumbled backward, gasping desperately for breath. The whisper returned sharply, echoing louder now, filled with desperate sorrow. Don't leave me here." Spinning around blindly, I sprinted toward the front, barely able to see ahead through pitch-black aisles. Employees stared bewilderedly as I emerged, breathless and pale. Struggling to explain my panic, I recounted what I'd experienced, only to be met by skeptical glances and cautious smiles. Later, safely home but still shaken deeply, I searched online desperately for information about Emily's disappearance. My heart froze solidly as I discovered chilling details. A series of strange occurrences had been reported in that Walmart for years, each inexplicably linked to aisle 13, an aisle management claimed repeatedly didn't even exist. But even now, months after that horrifying night, one question still haunts me endlessly. Why had Emily chosen me, begging desperately from the shadows for help I couldn't possibly provide? And even worse, is she still there, trapped forever, waiting silently for the next unsuspecting shopper to find themselves lost in aisle 13? It was just after midnight on an unusually warm evening in early August of 2020 when I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot of the Walmart in my small town in Ohio. I'd been driving all day after visiting family out of state and figured I'd quickly pick up some groceries before heading home. The parking lot lights flickered, casting distorted shadows on the pavement, and as I walked toward the entrance I felt an unsettling chill despite the summer heat. Once inside, the bright fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, illuminating aisles devoid of the usual bustling shoppers. Only a handful of employees roamed about, quietly stocking shelves or mopping floors, their faces tired and distant. Grabbing a shopping cart, I moved quickly, anxious to finish and finally get home. But the deeper I ventured into the store, the stranger things began to feel. The air was unusually cold, and despite the emptiness, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. As I turned into the cereal aisle, my attention was caught by a soft murmuring coming from the next aisle over. At first, I assumed it was an employee talking on a phone, but the voice sounded different, low, almost monotone, repeating something indistinct over and over. Curious, I slowly pushed my cart toward the source of the sound, the murmuring growing louder yet no clearer. Turning the corner carefully, I was startled to find the aisle empty, save for an elderly woman standing at the far end, staring blankly at the shelves. She didn't seem to notice me, her lips moving continuously in quiet repetition. Her appearance was odd. Her clothes looked outdated, a faded floral dress that hung loosely around her frail frame. Feeling concerned, I called out gently, asking if she needed help, but she didn't react, didn't even turn her head. She just stood motionless, still whispering the same unknown words. Unnerved, I decided to find an employee to assist her. Walking away, I glanced back one last time, shocked to see she had vanished entirely, the aisle now completely empty. Confusion and dread prickled my skin, but I shook my head, dismissing it as exhaustion. Still, unease lingered heavily. Trying to refocus, I hurried to grab the last items on my list. Minutes passed quietly until I reached the frozen section. Suddenly the murmuring returned, faint at first, then growing steadily louder, echoing eerily through empty aisles. Turning quickly, my pulse quickened as I saw her again, standing stiffly near the ice cream freezer, staring silently through the glass doors. Approaching cautiously, heart pounding, I gently asked if she was lost. This time she slowly turned toward me, her eyes empty, unblinking, glazed as if staring through rather than at me. My throat tightened, an overwhelming urge to flee building rapidly. But as I stepped back nervously, her expression suddenly shifted into one of intense sadness, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Her lips moved soundlessly, mouthing words that sent chills through my spine. They forgot me. Suddenly, the store's lights flickered violently, plunging us momentarily into darkness. When they returned, the woman had disappeared completely, leaving no trace she'd ever been there. Terrified and desperate for answers, I rushed toward the front of the store, seeking help. Approaching the registers, I found a young cashier quietly scanning items for another customer. Breathlessly, I recounted my experience, describing the woman and asking if anyone else had seen her. The cashier paled visibly, exchanging nervous glances with the other customer. Hesitantly, she explained that I wasn't the first person to describe encountering this elderly woman. Years earlier, a shopper had reportedly gone missing in this very Walmart. An elderly lady who had wandered into the store alone one evening and never returned home. Security footage showed her entering but never leaving, as though she simply vanished into thin air. The employee admitted softly that ever since then, occasional sightings occurred late at night, shoppers describing encounters eerily similar to mine. A chill ran down my spine as realization set in. I'd seen her clearly, spoken to her, felt her sadness. But had she truly been there, or was she merely an echo, a lingering memory trapped within the store walls, desperate to be remembered by someone, anyone? Shaken deeply, I quickly abandoned my cart, fleeing toward the parking lot without looking back. As I reached my car, however, something stopped me cold. On the windshield sat a faded photograph, edges worn and yellowed, showing a smiling elderly woman, the very same woman I'd just encountered inside. Flipping it over, I found a single handwritten sentence scrawled shakily. "Please don't forget me." Heart pounding, I glanced back at the store entrance, half expecting to see her standing there, watching silently. But the doorway was empty. Darkness and shadows, all that remained. Even now, months later, every time I pass by that Walmart, I can't help but wonder if she's still there, wandering the aisles alone, forgotten by everyone but those unfortunate enough to cross her path. And if someday perhaps I'll return to find her waiting patiently, hoping someone will finally help her find her way home. It was a stormy night in early March of 2022 when I started my first overnight shift at the Walmart in a small town near Richmond, Virginia. I'd recently moved there and needed a job, so despite having no prior retail experience, I eagerly accepted the overnight stocking position. The pay was decent, and I figured the quiet hours would make the work manageable. As I parked my car, heavy rain lashed down relentlessly, making the empty parking lot glisten under flickering streetlights. Inside, the store felt deserted, the harsh fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over vacant aisles and silent cash registers. A few co-workers nodded tired greetings, quickly dispersing into different sections to restock shelves. My supervisor briefly explained my duties, restocking items in the electronics and toy departments before vanishing into his office, leaving me alone to navigate the expansive store. At first, the solitude didn't bother me. It was peaceful, even comforting to methodically unpack boxes and arrange products neatly onto shelves. But as the hours ticked slowly past midnight, something shifted subtly in the atmosphere. The silence grew heavy, oppressive, broken only by occasional bursts of static from overhead speakers or distant creaks I rationalized as normal store sounds. Then, around 2 in the morning, things began feeling undeniably strange. While restocking video games, I noticed something unusual, a soft giggling coming faintly from somewhere nearby. Initially dismissing it as fatigue-induced imagination, I continued working. But the laughter persisted, growing louder and more distinct. Curious and slightly unnerved, I stepped out into the main aisle, glancing around cautiously. The toy department, located directly across from electronics, was dimly lit, rows of dolls and action figures staring blankly forward. As I approached carefully, the laughter abruptly stopped. My pulse quickened involuntarily. Maybe a coworker was pulling a prank, I reasoned nervously. Still, no one appeared when I called out softly. Unsettled, I turned back toward electronics, only to hear soft whispers echoing faintly behind me. Swallowing hard, I spun around quickly, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The toy aisle stood empty, motionless figures lining shelves like silent sentinels. But something was different. A single doll now lay face down in the aisle's center, clearly having fallen from a shelf. Hesitantly, I approached it, picking it up gently. The doll's face was unsettling, its painted smile too wide, eyes gleaming strangely under fluorescent lights. Chills rippled down my spine as I carefully returned it to the shelf, convinced exhaustion had triggered paranoia. Returning to my tasks, I worked silently for another half hour, trying to ignore the creeping sensation of being watched. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the silence behind me. Heart leaping, I turned sharply toward the toy aisle once more. Multiple toys lay scattered across the floor, their packaging ripped open violently, as if tossed carelessly by unseen hands. Fear surged through my veins, overpowering rational thought. Calling out shakily for co-workers went unanswered. I was utterly alone. Compelled by equal parts terror and curiosity, I approached cautiously, each step echoing through the empty store. Kneeling slowly to inspect the damage, I felt cold dread seize my body. Each scattered toy was positioned strangely, deliberately arranged to form an arrow pointing deeper into the store's darkness. My breath hitched painfully in my throat. Every instinct screamed to leave immediately, but morbid fascination drew me onward. Following the makeshift arrow, I moved hesitantly deeper into the store, passing through clothing racks and sporting goods, lights flickering erratically above. Finally, the trail ended abruptly outside a stockroom door partially ajar. Hands trembling uncontrollably, I gently pushed it open wider, revealing a dimly lit storage area cluttered with boxes and equipment. Stepping inside, my stomach churned violently. The air felt thick, charged with something unnatural. Just as panic overwhelmed reason, the storage room door slammed shut violently behind me, plunging me into total darkness. Scrambling desperately, I tugged the door handle. It wouldn't budge. Locked inside, heart racing painfully, I fumbled for my phone flashlight, its weak beam illuminating the cramped space. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the frigid air. A faint rustling echoed softly nearby, and terror paralyzed me as I aimed my flashlight shakily toward its source. Among stacked boxes stood the same doll from earlier, now upright, its grotesque smile illuminated eerily. But it wasn't alone. Dozens more dolls surrounded me, their faces twisted into horrifying expressions of rage and malice. I screamed uncontrollably, pounding desperately against the locked door as soft laughter filled the room, childlike yet sinister, echoing cruelly around me. Just as despair nearly consumed me, the door burst open suddenly, my supervisor standing bewildered in the doorway. I stumbled out frantically, gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. But when he stepped inside, shining his flashlight around carefully, nothing appeared out of place. No dolls, no scattered toys, only an ordinary storage room. Later, after calming slightly, I resigned immediately, refusing to return even once. Co-workers exchanged uncomfortable glances, admitting reluctantly that similar incidents plagued overnight staff regularly. Employees quitting abruptly, describing chilling encounters they refused to detail further. Even now, months later, whenever I pass a Walmart, I can't help but wonder if somewhere inside, those dolls still wait patiently, smiling silently, eager for their next visitor, another unsuspecting employee to terrorize during the lonely midnight hours. If these Walmart horror stories kept you on the edge of your seat, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more chilling tales. Stay alert, because you never know what might be lurking down the next aisle.